It's the end of December and I've been sick almost all month. I mean, who doesn't want to be sick for Christmas and their birthday? So every single book I read this month happened to be on my Nook, because most of the reading I did late at night, in my bed, when I didn't want to turn the light on. The first book I read was Evil Genius by Jinks. I don't know if you can see this. I'll try and adjust it if you can't. This was one of the books that I said I was going to read way back in May when I started YouTubing, but then I didn't finish. The reason being is that this book was incredibly boring to start off. The first 3 quarters of the book are setting up for the last quarter. Now this is a trilogy, so it's quite possible that the setup was also for the next 2 books. But the only reason I was able to get through this book is because I have a problem where I cannot put a book down once I start. I have to power my way through it, no matter how utterly boring the book is. Now the last quarter of the book was actually quite entertaining, and I actually enjoyed reading it. I got through that part in like 2 hours. But it took me 7 months to work through the 3 quarters of the book because the setup was just so boring. I felt a lot of it could be condensed and edited. I felt there was way too much internal struggle with the character, and I tend to not like books where characters deal with a lot of internal stuff when there isn't that much actually happening externally. There was just so much setup that I'm not sure I want to pick up the next book in the trilogy and read it, because I'm afraid it's going to be the same thing where like 3 quarters of the book is I'm just waiting for something to happen and nothing really ever happens. The next book that I read was The Princess Academy by Shannon Hale, which is actually a Newbery Honor book. It's about a girl whose entire village is selected to become, that the prince will marry a girl from that village, and so they're all sent down to an academy for basically princess training. It shows that not every girl is actually interested in becoming a princess, that the girls all have different aspirations. I definitely liked the Princess Academy a lot more than I expected to. The next book I read was The Grimm Sisters, which is the first book in the fairy tale detective series by Michael Buckley. This book was actually recommended to me by my uncle. He said it was quite an entertaining book and he really liked it. So Sabrina and Daphne, who are the 2 main characters, are sent to live with their grandmother after a year in foster care after their parents disappeared. I actually like this book also. I have to say my favorite character is Puck, that I read. Was not a children's book at all, in any way, in any shape, in any form. It was Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man and Dubliners by James Joyce. It was a combo book, so I ended up reading both. I had read James Joyce's The Dead and for school during one semester, and I've read Araby quite a few times. And I have a friend who really likes James Joyce, and when you hear him talk about James Joyce, you think you can like James Joyce too. Turns out I can't. This book was painful for so many reasons for me to read, and this is another book that I started reading in May, and it took a really long time. Like, there were several times that I was like, you know, just move this to my completed books because I don't want to read this book. I just can't be a fan of Joyce. Like, I probably could like Joyce if I was studying him in a class where we got to talk about his work, and if you didn't understand something, you could talk about it with other people. But reading it on your own as a book for entertainment and enjoyment, it's just so dry. It's unbelievably dry. And I'm glad I finished it. I don't think I will ever be rereading this book again. The next book I read was one I picked up for free from the Nook store when I first got my Nook. I was looking for a bunch of books for free to add to my collection so I would have stuff to read. I can find the cover and show you. It's called Inhuman by Danielle Q. I'm not exactly sure what genre this book is supposed to be. It feels like it's supposed to be a love story. At the time, it feels like it's supposed to be a alien novel. It's also supposed to be like a government conspiracy novel. And it doesn't do any of them very well. This book says it's 400 pages long. But if you were to compare it to an actual book, it's probably about 100 pages long. So it's much more like a novella than a novel. A lot of the characters aren't really developed. I'm not exactly sure of the main character's opinions on anything by the time the novel ends. It just feels so incomplete. I, on occasion, go back and reread books that I really liked. One book that I recently did this for was The Giver. I didn't hate it, and in fact, now that I've gone back and reread it, almost, a decade later, oh my god, I feel so old now. A decade ago, I read this book. When I went back and read it, I actually liked it even more because I knew how the book ended this time. I was able to see how everything fell into place. I have no real way of knowing whether someone likes what makes it so that people like this book or what makes it so that people hate it. Other than I know people like a definitive ending, and this one doesn't have a definitive ending like a lot of books don't. This is definitely one of the favorite books that I read this month. Second only to the next book. My favorite book that I read this month was The Red Pyramid. I pretty much have liked every book I have read by this author, from Percy Jackson to this. I would read his books just for the fact the titles of each of his chapters are hilarious. This book follows the siblings Carter and Sadie as they try to save the world from the evil Egyptian god Set. This book was just like amazing. I didn't want to stop reading it. I'd be like, I have to go to bed now, but I don't want to. I mean, I could keep reading this. No one would know if I like stayed up for another 3 hours reading this book. I actually own the next book as well, and I almost moved that off of the other Nook wall, because my Nook has 3 walls, and put it onto the wall that I'm currently reading the books off of, so I could just read it the next one. This book is really well written. I picked this book up for $2 from the Nook store because it was on a daily deal, and I would have paid the hardcover price for this book had I known how good it was. It's right up there with Percy Jackson and all of my other favorite books. Definitely one of my all-time favorite books. Cause, yeah, just read The Red Pyramid. If you read one book from the books I've listed, I would recommend The Red Pyramid. And the last book I read, The Chronicles of Harris Burdick. So apparently, according to this book, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but Harris Burdick was a man who showed up at a publishing company with some pictures, a caption, and a title, and it was all like, hey, do you want to read the rest of these books? And the guy was like, yeah. He's like, okay, I'll bring them tomorrow. And he never returned. No one knows what happened to him. So The Chronicles of Harris Burdick, 14 different authors wrote stories to go with the caption, the title, and the picture, and they were compiled into a book. Authors like Lois, Lowry, Stephen King, Kate DiCamillo, going off the top of my head, who else? Tabitha King. Lemony Snicket wrote the introduction. I'm sure he has another name, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember what it is. I think the Stephen King story was the best. And it was just really interesting to see how, like, some authors took something that you would look at the picture and think it was like completely fantastical, and they would make a realistic story about it, and others just were like they went more off the wall than you thought was possible, and you're like, okay, yeah. I definitely like the Chronicles of Harris Burdick. It was, I wish I'd read it earlier in my life when I was reading when I was like exposed to these stories the first time, or the pictures. Those are, what, the 8 books I read in December? Until next time.